Hi everybody, Kat here. Thanks for joining me today. Today I thought we would do some wet on wet practice. The most common question I see in the watercolor groups that I belong to is, how do you control the water? How do you know how much water to use? Well, the first thing I can tell you about that is it all depends on what paper you're using, the brushes that you're using, and also the paint. So my best advice is to just keep practicing and try practicing with the tools you're going to use often, because once you change, even if you change to a better paper or better brushes, you're going to have to adjust the way you paint. I thought what we could do today is paint a peacock feather, or maybe two, if time permits, and then my next video will paint a whole peacock, which won't be as scary if you can get your wet on wet technique down. So a peacock feather has lots of feathers, and then in the center it has sort of like what looks like a fried egg to me. So there's like this would be the white, and then there's something in the middle here, and then there's like a little heart shape. Now there's many peacocks and they're all beautiful, so let's just make this our own. Choose 3 colors that you like to look at together. So I chose a bright rose, I chose a marine blue, and a cobalt blue, and that's what's going to be in the center of my peacock feather. I recommend having 2 jars of water, one for cleaning your brush and the other one for applying the water to your paper. So just go over, I'm passing the lines of my drawing because I want everything here to be quite soft, and I can put sharp edges where I want them later. I'm using Canson Monval paper. This is not cotton paper, and I didn't want to do this exercise on cotton because if you're a beginner, you're more than likely not painting on cotton paper. So you just make sure it's nice and wet, no puddles, and you take, oh yes, also use 1 small brush and 1 large brush. Doesn't matter, whatever you're comfortable with. So with my larger brush, I wet my brush. Make sure there's nothing dripping on the sides, but this is wet. If you look at on my hand, that's wet. So I'm going into my bright rose. Now when you're working with this paper, you do have to work faster, so I may have to wet this again, we'll see. So my bright rose is it's got nice pigment, but it's watery. And I'm going to paint around the egg yolk. So when I put this paint down, I don't want to go right to the edge of my drawing if I want it to end there, because it's going to just spread out where it wants to go, because water wants to fill whatever space it can. And watercolor paint wants to go wherever it's wet. And working wet on wet always guarantees you're going to have nice soft edges. So that's what I'm trying to achieve here. Nice soft edges. You see it fanning out, and you can see the glisten of the paper still. Now the center, I can see here that my center is still nice and damp. So I'm going to move to my smaller brush right now. I'm just cleaning my big one out. I'm going to move to my smaller brush, and I'm going to dry that off a little bit. And I'm going to go into my marine blue. Now I woke these paints up a couple of minutes ago with just a drop of water. Do you see how thick that is? I want it a little bit. I'm putting 1 little drop of water on the end of my brush, and I want it a little thicker than this pink paint, because if I make it the same as this pink paint, it's going to fan out way past the pink, and I don't want that. I want them to kind of meet. So I'm just dropping this in close to the edge of the pink, and you don't have to paint the center if you don't want, but I'll just go right over it. And if you, because I'm going to put a darker blue in here, but if not, you can just dab out some. Now these two will join when they meet, they're just going to sort of spread into each other, and the effect is quite beautiful. The other trick to painting wet on wet is learning how to get soft edges without getting all this big spread. Sometimes you don't want that. So with my very small brush right here, I wet the brush. I'm just showing you the wetness of my brush here. And I'm going into this is cobalt blue hue. This is a color, it's darker than this. It's a truer blue, see? And I want this creamy. So I want only enough water in this to activate the paint. That's it. I don't want it like that, and I don't want it like that. Quite thick. And then I'm going to drop in the paint where I saw that little heart shape, where I drew that little heart shape. And why I use thick paint is because it will not be able to travel because it has less water in it. But there's enough water in order to achieve these nice soft edges like that. I know this is tricky and it seems like you're never going to learn it, but I promise you that if you practice with your same tools, so if you have 17 brushes, try to narrow it down to a couple and use the same paper for a little while and practice these feathers. So we're going to do another one. I'm going to turn my book around, and this time I'm going to do it a little bit upside down. I'm just going to draw it so that you can see where I'm at. So I'm doing my little egg yolk here. Now I'm going in with my clean, sparkling clean water. Once again, we're going to wet all around. And no puddles, just wet. If you find it tricky to work this quickly, I would try wetting the back of the paper first. I'm working in a pad of paper right now, so I can't do that. Wetting the back of your paper first, laying it down on the surface you like to paint on, and then wet the top. And normally what that does is it slows down the drawing process, so this should stay nice and wet for you as you're working. This brush is not very wet anymore because it's been sitting on the side. So I'm going to wet my brush. You can hear that, dabbing it off. And then I'm just drawing the edge of the brush. I'm not drawing this part. And I'm going to put my paint up here so you can see it. And then I've got my camera zoomed in really close so you can see the effects. So I'm going to try and I don't want this too light because then you lose the pigment. So I'm just going to dab a tiny bit more. It's nice and watery. And we're going to do the same thing we did before. Now watch what happens if I put less water. So less water, but more pigment. Do you see the difference? It doesn't move as much. It will move much more slowly. That will move much more quickly, and you'll have a lot less control. If you thicken up the paint just a bit, you'll have more control. So that's what I'm doing. It's kind of fun to lose control though when you're watercolor, especially if you're doing something fun like this. Sometimes you want a field of flowers and you want some of them to be out of focus, so that would be a good time to employ this technique. Just getting a bit more on my brush. And that's looking great. I really like that. I'm just cleaning my brush. It's a good habit to get into, even if you're not going to use it next. Clean your brush. Now I'm going to take my other brush. I wet it. I dried it like this. Just like that. Tap, 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 tap. And then this is it's kind of like you know, mustardy sort of. So now I'm going to go in here and just go around close to that pink, so they'll just gently meet up. They'll kiss each other kind of thing, and they'll meet up. Okay, so just keep dropping it in. Like that. And now I'm going to take my tiny brush and I'm going to go into this very thick pasty kind of paint. It's only as wet enough to activate, like I said. So I'm going to go do an upside down heart. Now my paper is still wet, so don't forget, that's why this paint has to be almost waterless. Because if it has water, it's going to bleed. There. And practicing this is really going to serve you well, because when you go to paint something that requires, you know, this section you need wet on wet and this section you don't, you'll be able to maneuver. You'll be able to see where, oops, I went wrong there. I shouldn't have put so much water here. You see, I added a bit of water here on the edges so that they would meet, and it caused like this beautiful bloom. So now I'm going to go back to the original one. I'm just going to do the edge. Now this, you can see it's completely buckled, but it is not what I would call dry. So I'm going to do the edge of this in a phthalo green. So I'm just going to wake this up. I should have woken it up earlier with a couple of drops of water. And it's nice, juicy paint, but it is not what I would call super watery. Okay, and I'm going to go around the edge. And I'm just going to make it like a zigzaggy sort of thing. So the part that's against the pink, it may bleed into the pink still, if the paper is still wet. If it's not, that's okay. Now, if I want it to be soft on the inside of this, I would just take a damp brush and make sure you get those beads of water off of the ferrule, because they'll roll down and they'll make a big mess on your paper. So I'm just going to tickle that edge right here. See if I can get it to bleed. Now, it is harder on this paper to do that. You can do this on cotton paper a lot easier. There. And the rest we're going to leave a nice sharp edge, I think. I think that'll look nice. And this one is still quite a bit more wet, so I'll do that right away. Nice creamy milky paint, in between creamy and milky. See? And I'm going to go around the edge, just like that. Working with watercolor, it always surprises me how very little you need. So I know sometimes the prices of watercolor can be a little bit scary, but it really does go a long way. And I buy, it depends on what you have access to. You don't need a whole set of 24 colors or 12 colors. You need a warm blue, yellow, and red, and a cool blue, yellow, and red. And then I would recommend burnt sienna, and maybe like a dark, like say a Payne's gray, an indigo, or a black even. And you can do almost every color with those colors, with that limited palette. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some feathers. Now, I don't want all of them to be really sharp. Some of them I want them to be obscured. So I'm going to take my the brush with my clean water, and I'm going to just make some feathery sort of motion all the way around, not everywhere. I hope you can see that. It's just in water though, so let's see if I can maneuver my light. Let's see if I can get you to see that. There we go. Just like that. So then when I go in with my green, you can use any colors you like. I'm going to mix my green and my cobalt just because they're sitting there. And I'm going to make some nice feathers. And some of them are going to go through the water that I put down. And they're going to look a little obscured, which I love. Gives your painting a nice loose effect. Just making some very gentle sort of soft S shapes. And they're going to meet here in the middle. Whoops, sorry. We're going to meet here in the middle, and I'm going to use, maybe I'll use some of my marine blue mixed in with the bright rose, and I'll make a nice purpley color for the stem right down that center. And I'll add some of that color into the green feathers. Okay, so I'm going to come down, make some of those feather shapes. And I don't mind if it bleeds into this one. I kind of like that idea. Okay, so this is the 2 feathers. That'll be handy to practice for our next project. So I do hope that you enjoyed this video and that you found it helpful. And don't forget, practice makes almost perfect. If you like this video, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. And hit that notification bell. That way you'll know every time I do post a video. No matter what YouTube wants you to see, you'll see if I post a new one. Happy watercoloring, everybody. Bye-bye.